We will have our second panel today. It is the fundraising panel, a mix of professionals and volunteers responsible for raising funds for their organizations. They will provide insight by probing Muslim giving traditions and cycles, as well as engagement and outreach initiatives in both Muslim and other communities. I'd like to invite the panelists to the stage and welcome the moderator, Lula Adam from the Internal House. Please also welcome Dr. and Imam Zijad Delic from South Nepean Muslim Community, Ihsaan Gardee from the National Council of Canadian Muslims, and Rabia Khedr from the Canadian Association of Muslims with Disabilities.
Assalamu alaikum, and how are you today? I am not quite sure how we're supposed to follow Dr. Braish. So bear with us, we'll do our best. Thank you very much for coming, but you kind of put the bar very high. I was happy to be at this time because people have had lunch, but they're not sleeping yet. But then they heard you speak, and now we have to follow, so we'll do our best. As you see, we have wonderful speakers sitting on the panel. You will find their bios in the program that are supposed to be on your tables. So we're not going to go into them. They are very well known in our community, and they've done quite a bit within the Muslim community. And if I start talking about each one of them, we won't have time for the second panel. So we will kind of count on the program for you to learn more about them. Now, just to make a correction, Mina, first of all, Interval House of Ottawa is the name. It's a local shelter. And I'm supposed to be looking at Mina. Mina, put your hand up like that, because timing is of the essence. And we have wonderful speakers, and I like to speak too, but I'm not going to talk. So keep reminding me of the time so I can respect each body. Thank you very much. And if I forget, maybe people can whistle at me appropriately. Maybe I should take back that whistle thing. So we will start, and as Mina explained earlier, we will have some questions for each panelist, and at the end, I'm going to have open it up a bit and put some questions that any of them can jump in and talk. So I'm going to start with Imam Zijad, and I've had a conversation with Imam Zijad before, and I said, Imam, I know you're an Imam, and you do speak for a living at mosques, and people listen to you, but I'm going to be very harsh about time. So Imam said he will listen to me, and he will follow my lead. Right, Imam Zijad? Only your house. Just for today, just for today. I know that, Imam Zijad, that you are involved in SNMC, South Nepean Community Center, Muslim community, and that you're trying to raise right now funds for Islamic Center. Now, people would think in terms of a stereotypical in a Muslim community, it's an imam raising in a local community, and they're raising for a mosque. That's what we think of in the Muslim community. So people would think that's easy. So kind of the stereotype. What are challenges you've faced in terms of you trying to fundraise for an Islamic center within the city of Ottawa?
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Good afternoon. There are different ways that attract different crowds and different audiences when it comes to fundraising. South Nepean Muslim community actually has tried almost every single one of them, from traditional fundraisings to bazaars to walkathon and bikeathon to visiting donors, businesses, to servicing the community and in such a way getting some support from the community, through visiting other cities and other organizations across Canada, as well as to coming and knocking doors on some organizations within larger Canadian society, asking for grants or writing applications. So we have tried all of it. And of course, each one of these is having challenges. Many people think it's an easy job. It's a very, very difficult job. When you ask people's money from their pockets, It's very difficult because you know that people have money. And there are all of those who come for fundraisings. They didn't just buy a ticket, you know, only to give that $40 or $50, but rather they also come with intention maybe to give some dollars. As an imam, definitely I feel more pressured simply because I know many of those people. And I know many of those who have already given, so I have to look at them at eye and I have to ask for money and I have to say who will give 5,000, who will give 10,000. Sometimes going to their homes as well as their businesses, it is uncomfortable. But again, I'm not doing it for myself, and that gives me encouragement to say, look, you are doing it for the community, you are doing it for the benefit of other people. You know, it's a noble job. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, did it. See, there are evidences, actually all evidences in our tradition suggest that people didn't give money just like that. It was Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who initiated actually discourse and discussion as far as giving money is concerned. Example, I'll just give you one hint. A man came to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and he asked him for charity. And Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, asked him, do you have anything at your home, any valuable stuff? He said, I do have a blanket and a cup. He told him to bring that blanket and a cup. So he auctioned it in the mosque. And after he auctioned it in the mosque, he gave him 2 dinars and told him, take this dinar and go buy an axe, and with the other one buy some food for your family. And don't come to me in 7 to 10 days. So when man came back, he already earned some money, and that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, told him. And this also gives us an indication how we have to treat charity in terms of, you know, teaching people how to fish, not give them fish every day. So Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, instructed us in this area quite eloquently, and I think having that role as a fundraiser, besides 3 other portfolios that I have with SNMC, is challenging but very rewarding. When I go home, when I know that I have fundraised, you know, 50,000, 100,000, 2,000, $50, you know, I go home and sleep like a baby.
Now, you brought this up and I was curious. Does it help you that you're an imam?
Some people would say, mind your own business. Why you are engaged in these things? You know, just do prayer and that's it. I think the scope of Imam's job in North America is beyond prayer area. And if anybody else with other educational background can do it, why not Imam? Specifically, Imam does have I'm not trying to brag. Does have capacity of speaking, is eloquent, uses well, you know, Islamic texts and brings emotion a little bit up and uses those texts to open the hearts and pockets of people. Why not? It benefits a lot in that regard. Few critics will be there, but I look, you know, larger map in front of myself and I see 99.9 people who would say benefit to have an imam for such a fundraising dinner. And I have noticed actually in the last 2 years, not only from Canada, across North America, I get a lot of invites, not because of anything else, but because I'm an imam and I do that job with passion, and people feel comfortable to call me because they know I will touch the hearts and then it would generate some money.
Thank you, Imam Zijad. Now, Rabia, you're not an imam, but you still have to fundraise. I know that for your organization, I looked it up, and your objective is to develop a comprehensive, sustainable model of support and services for people with disability and their families. And that's the Canadian Association for Muslims with Disabilities. Now, some people might be curious, right? What was the idea behind CAMD? What was the gap that was seen that you felt that we need to connect? Because it might be easier just to connect with the broader community but why was there a focus specifics on Muslims with disabilities? If you want to speak to that.
Yep. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you, everybody. CAMD was formed by and for people with disabilities. We were individuals with disabilities involved in the mainstream around disability issues. We came from different walks of life, different backgrounds. The common dimension to us was that we did identify as Muslim and we identified as individuals with disabilities. We felt that as individuals with disabilities, we faced multiple barriers, given the fact that, one, we face barriers within our racialized communities, within our ethnic communities, within our faith communities, and being individuals with disabilities, and flip side, we face barriers in the mainstream as racialized, visible minorities, yada, 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 and having a disability. So the whole intersectional package, you know, I have my one-liner sort of that says, you know, I'm a Muslim, Punjabi, Pakistani, Canadian woman who's a wife, mother, blah, 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 and I have a disability. So it's the whole package. And, you know, the disability dimension is there on all fronts. So people within the Muslim community who happen to have a disability and their families were quite isolated. There was an understanding across the board in Muslim communities that, you know, hey, this is Canada. Canada gives all to disabled people. No. Canada gives very little to persons with disabilities. We're very thankful for being, having disabilities and living in Canada because we have systems and structures and laws that support us. But unfortunately, there are huge gaps in services. And there are unique needs that people have given their cultural and spiritual traditions intersecting with their disability experiences. So we formed the organization to, one, raise awareness, address gaps within the communities that Muslims associated with, and within the dominant culture where services were provided to individuals with disabilities, but their diverse backgrounds weren't necessarily reflected in the service delivery models.
And I know that, Rabia, you self-identify as somebody with a disability. Does that factor in when you're trying to fundraise?
Absolutely, you know, I mean, I make a joke about it that the world sees me as a blind brown woman or a brown blind Muslim woman, whichever sequence they choose to put it in. But the reality is, you know, it's the shock and awe effect, okay? Not to use Bushisms, but, you know, it's, the fact is that people can't believe that I can't see and stand up and speak at the same time. You know, and my latest line that some of you guys haven't heard is, I don't waste time seeing, I spend time doing. So yes, it comes in. Yes, it comes in very handy, and the fact is, because of the cause that we're advocating for and the services that we advocate for and the lack of awareness and understanding across the board in broader society and within the Muslim communities that we're connected to, it is really, really important for people to see real life examples, real lived experiences. And not only am I a person with a disability being blind, I also have siblings with disabilities, and I particularly have two adult brothers with intellectual disabilities who are, you know, 37 and 39 today and have the system has failed them again and again. They have fallen through the cracks in our journey as a nation from institutionalization to community inclusion. And, you know, we've broken old systems and inadequately constructed new systems to support people with developmental disabilities. And sharing that journey, sharing that experience, sharing the passion to ensure that families who are emerging with young youth and adults with autism and developmental delay and CPP, etc., learn from our experiences and don't have to struggle the same way we have had to struggle for services can be a very powerful and effective way to engage parents with disabilities, parents of children with disabilities, their friends, their allies, professionals, and the broader community to truly raise awareness and indicate the gaps and say, hey, you know what, it's great that you're giving to global causes. Yes, there's a lot of emotion and passion in those causes, but you need to hear the real stories and struggles of caregivers and parents that are struggling to support their children with disabilities whose behaviors get criminalized and medicalized and et cetera, and there's really no support for them. And they also lose their identity and their spirituality in terms of their cultural experiences because the system really cannot support them.
Thank you. And I know, Rabia, you mentioned, and this from your experience, from the passion, from the family, how do you use that for the fundraising in terms of strategies? What strategies worked for you?
Again, we've tapped into leaders within Muslim communities who are sensitive to disability issues simply because they have a sibling, a child, a family member with a disability. We've built on personal relationships. We've sought out allies, who are again sensitive to the causes and engaged them to be supportive of our cause and help us raise that awareness. We've used imams to do the fundraising who are popular and powerful because we learned that our new and innovative ways didn't necessarily work with the masses and have them pull out their checkbooks and put their credit cards on the table, that, we needed some spiritual motivation, or coercion. We've done that. We've done the personal stories of individuals. We've, again, engaged mosques and said, you know what, you need to support us. And in some cases, some of those mosques have been generous contributors toward our causes. We've also made a case where we brought together mainstream service providers, community leaders within the Muslim communities, parents, professionals around disability, with the generous support of our Lieutenant Governor, who happens to be a personality with a disability, and actually engaged in a discussion that brought us forward in building a corporate partnership with Ansar Cooperative Housing Corporation to actually now have a location where we can base our activities out of.
So the message is, if you have a fundraiser, invite an imam.
It works.
It works. It works.
It works, but we've also learned, Lula, we've actually learned that people are also tired of long fundraisers. So we put a time limit on our fundraisers. We tell our imams, please, and I'm as bad on time as you are. So 20 minutes, 30 minutes max.
And speaking of time,
yes.
Rabia, I'm cutting you off. Just saying. We don't want to, exclude Ihsaan from the conversation.
Absolutely.
Or he might want to stay out of the conversation at the moment. It's okay. It's your floor. We're going to give you an opportunity. Ihsaan, I know that, we went from, local mosque centers and, fundraising within the Muslim community for Muslims with disability. Now, National Council of Canadian Muslims is a bit different in terms of what they do and how you advocate. So can you tell me some challenges you face in terms of fundraising for an advocacy organization?
Thank you, Lula.
You're welcome. Sorry for starting with the big question at the beginning.
That's okay. That's fine. And it's an honor to be here today. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, everybody, for coming out today as well, and thank you to my fellow panelists. Some of the challenges that we face. Well, I think first, for those people who aren't familiar with our organization, it might be good for me to just give you a bit of a background. We're the National Council of Canadian Muslims. We were previously known as CareCan up until July of last year, when we rebranded, changed our name, mainly because we wanted to clarify that we were a Canadian-focused organization, and that was our mandate, was a domestic mandate. We work in four main areas: human rights and civil liberties, education and outreach, media engagement, and public advocacy. And we work our best to represent and speak on behalf of a diverse range of and spectrum of Canadian Muslims on these issues. We've advocated for over 14 years on behalf of Canadian Muslims, and we've been involved in high-profile cases you may have heard of, like the case of Meher Arar, the Canadian who was sent overseas and tortured in Syria, as well as other high-profile cases. But the bulk of our work is more what I call day-to-day cases. I don't like to describe it as less important, because if you're discriminated against or you're harassed, it's very, very important to you. So that, by way of background, that's a little bit about what we do. And for more information, I'd encourage you to visit our new website, which was launched on the 29th of March at nccm.ca. So N as in November, CCM like Mike.ca. In terms of some of the challenges that we face, well, I think one of the other questions that one of the other panelists was asked that I think might be useful to understand is a bit of the background of the context is why did we start NCCM in the first place? What was the gap that was perceived to be there? And before NCCM, there were many other organizations, and there still are several other organizations, local and national, that speak on a variety of different issues. But their mandates are different and generally included a different range of issues, whether they were domestic or foreign or otherwise. And NCCM sought to carve out a niche to serve Canadian Muslims in the fields of human rights and civil liberties, complemented by the work in the aforementioned fields. So some of the challenges that we face are very similar to the challenges faced by other Muslim organizations as well as other organizations in the field of fundraising. And we're affected by them equally, whether it's looking at the macro level and you're looking at, for example, the economy and challenges in the economy affect Muslim organizations, affect NCCM, donor fatigue, hearing different appeals all the time, and trying to discern where to direct their funds, as well as a desire to see tangible results. You know, what is my donation actually helping to achieve? In terms of some of the operational challenges that we face, NCCM as an organization, we're a non-profit organization, we're not a charity. And we've sought a legal opinion about whether or not we could achieve charitable status from a legal firm that specializes in charity law, and they came back and said, well, because of the nature of some of the activities that you do that can be deemed political in nature, as the folks in this room know, you've got that CRA mandated limit that no more than 10% of your activities can be deemed political in order for you to be eligible or to maintain your charitable status. So that was the opinion that we came back from, or came back to us with. We haven't closed the door on it. I know there's other options that other organizations have considered and done, whether it's forming an educational trust and keeping the advocacy work separate. So that's still an ongoing discussion that we're having at this point. But it does certainly impact on our ability to raise funds. I remember when I came in here earlier, I saw that one of the list of items on what are some of the motivations of people to give, that whether or not you get a tax receipt was listed as the last one. And I agree that, you know, that's may very well be the case, but one of the questions that I get asked often is, when I'm asking people to donate, is, do I get a charitable tax receipt? So that is certainly an incentive. And I would say that it's certainly a consideration for people when they are giving, and also the size of the gift that they may choose to give. How do you determine whether or not after somebody hears that you don't have charitable status, whether they're giving you less or more? It's a bit of a difficult conversation to have sometimes with people. With a smaller organization such as ours as well, working on a very limited budget, I like to say we do a lot with very, very little, as many of the organizations that we work with and that are here as well today do. It means that it becomes everybody's job to do fundraising. So you may not necessarily have a dedicated individual whose sole job is just to do fundraising. So it becomes the task of everybody in the organization, as a face of the organization, as a representative of the organization, when they're out in the public, to do that kind of work or to be involved in that kind of work. And that means involving and engaging all of the members of the organization, whether it's the staff, but also at the board level. So when you have nonprofit organizations with volunteer board members, they bring different skills and different abilities to the table, and they're recruited for a variety of different reasons. But one of the key things to impart in bringing in new board members is that part of their role will be to help to fundraise, right? So that the organizations can do the task that they are tasked for, and still do some fundraising, because it doesn't abdicate them of their responsibility, but to get them involved in that, to educate them, to empower them, and to give them the tools that they need to help with fundraising. And then, as I said, we experience some of the similar challenges that other organizations face: natural attrition of donors, people deciding for whatever reason to cancel, modify, decrease their donation. They have a baby, they buy a car, they lose their job, they move, so on and so forth. In addition to that, as I was saying in the car on my way here, as I was giving a lift to Dr. Abulaish and his colleague Laura, was that the Muslim community as a whole in Canada, there's a perception that we're new to Canada, and that's actually incorrect. Muslims have been in Canada since before Confederation. But I don't blame people for holding that conception, because many Muslims are in fact new to Canada due to waves of immigration, changes in immigration policy, multiculturalism policy. So for many large segments of the community, they are newer to Canada. The community is a nascent one. So there's a lack of established infrastructure. So what you see here, just in Ottawa alone, we have 4 or 5 ongoing mosque projects. There are other projects and other infrastructure that still need to be developed, whether they're senior homes and so on and so forth, community centers. And so you have a competition for dollars, right? And when it comes to asking people for funds, the kind of work that NCCM does, it's sometimes difficult for people who may be new to the country or who may not understand the importance to grasp why an institution like NCCM is important. It's very easy for people to think in tangible terms, and you have the religious justification as well for building mosques, is that you build a mosque here or a house for God here and he will build you one in paradise. So you have to build on that and work with the other institutions here in terms of breaking down those psychological barriers that people may have to donating and to helping them to understand why this work is important.
Now, I have to ask this question because we talked about this. When I think of a possible challenge for fundraising for NCCM, the current legal action against the Prime Minister's office, how is that playing in terms of the fundraising activities? Because you got a lot of media buzz around it, right?
Well, I think for the benefit of those people here who may not be familiar, I'd better give the folks here a bit of a background.
A brief one, please?
A very brief. I'll work brief.
Exactly.
Back in January, our organization sent a letter to the Prime Minister criticizing a decision that he had made, basically questioning and asking him to reconsider a decision that he made to take a particular individual with him on his inaugural trip to Israel and Jordan, based on the fact that this individual had hosted, praised, and defended the views of 2 very well-known leaders of the anti-Muslim movement in the US. And so we wrote to the Prime Minister asking him very professionally, it's an open letter, you can read it online, to reconsider that decision, because we felt the office of the Prime Minister should not be lending legitimacy to those kinds of views. And we didn't hear anything back, not surprisingly. So a couple of days later, I got a call from a reporter, asked me if I'd heard anything. I told him no. And so the reporter said, well, I'm going on this trip to Jordan and Israel, so I'll call the Prime Minister's office and get back to you. So he called the office, came back to me and said, this is what they said. And I was sort of floored, and I said, can you send that to me in an email? And basically, the spokesperson for the Prime Minister said, we will not take seriously criticism from an organization with documented ties to a terrorist organization such as Hamas. So that was kind of a shock to us. And in terms of how we proceeded, well, it was not once until Mr. McDonald's statement was made that any government representative have made this kind of objection to NCCM. Until we criticized what we thought was a poor choice by the Prime Minister. And then, like others who have been targeted, whether it's environmentalists described as foreign-funded radicals, or the muzzling of scientists, or the shuttering of internationally respected NGOs like Rights and Democracy, NCCM, it was open season. So we felt that this was a troubling trend, and we felt it was important for us to stand up and to correct the record and to demand an apology and a retraction, which we've done by serving the Prime Minister with a notice of libel, and then we followed up just this past week, a week ago, with a statement of claim because they had not come back to us. So when it comes to that, what is the impact on fundraising, the ability to fundraise? It's a little early at this point. It does have an impact, I think, in terms of first of all, it has an impact on the people who work for the organization, whether it's the board members, the staff members, the volunteers, and the perception of them by their fellow community members, by the broader community at large. And And does it help with fundraising? We've seen some donations coming in. People say that no PR is bad PR. I would argue that that might not be the case all the time. It's very difficult to determine the impact at this point. It's certainly something that we are working on. It's certainly something that I think as well casts a potential chill, right? Because people who may have considered giving to our organization or to other organizations that have been similarly targeted will now think twice, just because people will be looking over their shoulders. And it sort of makes you wonder, who is the government relying on for this information, and how will I be affected by this if I support this organization, right? And who is under scrutiny and who isn't? Do I go to a particular mosque? By going to a particular mosque, does that mean I'm going to be the target of this kind of scrutiny and investigation? And then you have to ask yourself the question then, what defines due diligence for the organization as well? How far do they have to go into looking into particular donors and so on and so forth? Is it okay for us to accept a check from this particular individual? How much research do we have to do on the backgrounds and so on and so forth? So these are all things that have come to light in terms of questions, and they're important questions to be answered, and I think it's an important wake-up call. But at the same time, I think there is a potential opportunity here for organizations, for our organizations and other organizations, to look at their fundraising activities and to determine, what is missing, or is there something there that needs to be there in terms of fundraising policies and procedures, so that that due diligence is being done, so that you are taking every step that you are required to take by the law to make sure that you are acting in accordance to the law.
Thank you. Now, in terms of, we are here at the Foundation of Philanthropy Canada, and we're discussing fundraising within the Muslim community. I'd like to hear from the panel, do you think you have to be Muslim to fundraise in the Muslim community? You can, Ihsaan, you have to be the last person who speaks because you spoke most. So Rabia or Imam Zijad?
For Rabia, Sister Rabia.
Okay. I don't think you have to be Muslim to fundraise in a Muslim community. I think lots of members of the Muslim community, our mainstream donors, are very sensitive to mainstream activities. More and more we're seeing youth getting involved. Like, for example, I went to 2 events in Mississauga a weekend before, and I was so pleased to see so many young people volunteering to support the fundraising process and contributing and participating. One was for the MS Society, and one was for cystic fibrosis. So some of those more mainstream common causes Muslims are contributors to. So if somebody from the mainstream reaches out to Muslims, they certainly do give.
I think, as our guest speaker very clearly indicated, this is our society and we are part of it, and we have responsibilities and obligations towards it, not only from social perspective but from religious perspective as well. I have been in fundraisings basically not just geared towards Muslim causes, but rather towards any other communal causes. And just to maybe give you a hint, my organization, South Nepean Muslim Community, actually goes beyond fundraising only for Muslim causes. We give, actually we just worked on 23 scholarships given to high schools, college and university. So South Nepean Muslim Community gives to Muslims and others. We are regularly supporting Barhaven Cupboard, food bank, as well as Ottawa Food Bank, Ottawa Food Mission. One of the latest works that we have done with United Muslim Group in Ottawa is to support CHIO Hospital, Children Hospital here in Ottawa. And I do see a volunteer, one of the people from CHIO Hospital down there. Our target this year is to go over $120,000 for Chia Hospital, that's another target. So it doesn't matter, is it a Muslim cause or not Muslim cause? The most important thing, as Brother Vasim pointed out, خَيْرُ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَنْفَعُ النَّاسِ. The best among the people are those who benefit people. We are all human beings, and we all have the same hopes, the same aspirations, the same fears, the same needs. We sometimes don't understand. We think that's not the truth, but in reality it is. I've seen Muslims crying, and I've seen non-Muslims crying. I've seen Muslims smiling and being happy, and I've seen non-Muslims being unhappy. So all of it, plays in. When it comes to myself going to fundraise for others, definitely I have done it. And whenever I am called to do that job, I would always do it. And it is pro bono.
Thank you. Now, speaking of people, we're going to open it up for questions. So if people would like to ask some question of the panel, please, you see the microphones, which I should use. Please, and would you like to go ahead?
This is slightly tangential, but Rabia, you spoke about the services in the general community for people with disabilities. I'm a social worker, and one of my concerns is that there's a great gap of knowledge on the part of people who are disabled and on the part of the community in general about a number of the programs that exist. And I think that there are ways of dealing with that, but it's a serious problem.
Thank you for your comment. Rabia, do you want to say something?
Absolutely. There is a lack of understanding and awareness, and agencies and organizations, we're constantly collaborating and building partnerships to educate the broader community and ethno-specific cultural communities, spiritual communities around what programs and services are in fact out there. But my comment specifically was around developmental services, that there's a huge gap. In fact, we have a waiting list of over 11,000 adults with intellectual disabilities whose parents are aging into their 70s, 80s, and even 90s, who cannot any longer take care of their son or daughter who needs daily support. And we don't have services in this province right now.
Thank you, Rabia. I'm going to be a bit harsh. So I'm going to ask that the questions pertain to fundraising, please and thank you. So if you do, I'm going to go here, go ahead.
My question is, did you experiment with social enterprises, and if they are beneficial to your causes? Because they tend to, when I fundraise, that if I sell something, I make more money than if I ask for money.
Anybody wants to take that? Social enterprises?
What could you
elaborate maybe
elaborate?
A little bit? Yeah?
A social enterprise is a non-profit. Sorry, a social enterprise is always attached to a charity, which is a non-profit entity that brings in revenues to. For example, I volunteered at Equitable. They're social enterprises. They make conference bags to support their.
If I can maybe jump in there before Imam Delic, social enterprise is actually a part of our strategic plan in the next 3 to 5 years, that people with disabilities are the most unemployed segment of our population, and social enterprise is one way of us building business models. And of course our conservative government loves enterprise, and they support the idea of social enterprise. So we want to create small business models where we can create employment opportunities for individuals who cannot be competitively employed, and hence generate some revenue for the organization itself and service delivery.
And I think the other two organizations might not have the same mandate, so we're going to leave it at Rabia unless Imam Zijad wants to add something.
I just want to suggest, as far as South Nepean Muslim community is concerned, and our focus at this point of time is basically on building the infrastructure. Of course, during that period of time, what is good maybe to be mentioned to all of you is great thing that SNMC or South Nepean Muslim community did is we built community before we started building infrastructure. this idea has helped us so easily to go through building a building. Because when you build community, when you build people, it's very easy to bring money in, because people already trust you. Only in the last 3 years we have raised around $5 million. And all of this money came, as I said, through different ways that are not just traditional, but rather including almost every single possible activity that would generate money. Example, we cannot open up a business with SNMC, or we did not actually check out would we be going into such adventure or not. But definitely that's a way of moving forward, because once when we finish South Nepean Muslim Community Center and the masjid, people would not be donating money as they used to. Now we have to look for activities that would be able to generate money for our masjid. Therefore, we have already started working with partners such as United Way and some other charitable organizations that would be helping us in terms of grants that would help us have our activities generate some funds. And another thing that is important is that whenever we organize any activity, such as matchmaking, example, those who are not married, you can just call.
Here's a list of people.
Second, youth programs, seniors programs. We have noticed, even though we don't charge anything for these activities, we get huge supports. When you give people activities, when you work with people, and when you give them some services, people pay back. And we have noticed that every month, example, when we have seniors program, we pay maybe $500 for all activity. We get at least $2,000 as a donation. So there is always payback that we get on serving the community.
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead.
So my question is, first of all, thank you for your presentation. You mentioned the board of directors, and I know that often non-for-profits, when they have boards, one of their main mandates is, of course, to help with the fundraising. But a lot of the times the boards focus on the governance of the organization, and they kind of get caught up in the nitty-gritty of the day-to-day operations. So my question would be for what have been kind of your best practices in getting your board of directors to focus on the fundraising, and what are their efforts towards fundraising, and what would you recommend to non-for-profits struggling with getting their directors to focus more on the fundraising piece of their mandate? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Wow. Maybe come back in a year and I'll tell you how successful I've been in terms of getting more traction in that area. I think it's a constant challenge because generally speaking, when people come and they give of their time to serve on board of directors, not-for-profits, many of these individuals are very, very busy and have very busy lives as it is to begin with, whether it's professional and other endeavors that they're engaged in. So they're spreading themselves in a number of different directions because they're passionate about different causes. So in terms of some of the steps that I've taken to help try and engage my board a little bit more, I bought them books, for example, Fundraising Realities that every nonprofit board member should know, and I got one for each of my board members and sent it to them.
Can I have some copies?
Of course. And I'm regularly in contact with different board members, more closely with a smaller group of board members that form an executive committee within the board, encouraging them to leverage their contacts and to leverage their networks. One of the things that I've found is that and my introduction to fundraising has been sort of a very self-taught affair to date, and I have a great deal of respect for everybody in this room for all the work that you do. It's an incredibly difficult task to do fundraising, in addition to all the other work that gets done. But one of the things that I've found is that people like to give a lot based on relationships. People give to other people they know, like, and trust. And the cause, yes, that is important. They want to know that it's going towards a good cause. They want to know that the people who are receiving the funds are competent, that they will be judicious with how they spend that money. But there's nothing that can replace a warm introduction to somebody who has already given to the organization, for example. So when a board member goes to speak to a donor and says, well, I support this organization, not only am I a board member, but I'm supporting this organization with my own money, it adds weight. I find it gives a certain amount of credibility to that request, to that ask, when that donor, when that board member is approaching that donor. So that's another thing I've done, is I've encouraged and made sure that all of our board members are also donors to the organization.
Ihsaan,
Right?
I'm going to have to stop you. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Yes, short one. One last question, I'm sorry, and then we have to wrap up, because it's not me. You can talk to Mina and that table.
There is
telling me what to stop. It's not me.
one thing that I wanted to mention is in regards to how board members get engaged. Actually, with South Nepean Muslim community, every board member has to give 2 hours every week. That would mean being engaged directly with the activities, or give skills. Besides money that they give, they have to give time and expertise. What I also noticed that helps is follow-up. Example, board members are responsible to follow up on donations. It's easier to get money from already people who have given if you follow up. Our percentage of getting pledges back or fulfilled in South Nepean Muslim community is 95 to 98%.
That's impressive.
Why? Because our office administrator would call, then president would call, and then I would call.
There's no avoiding paying SNMC.
So it's not a strategy of bullying anybody. It's, believe me, it's a very soft, kind, and generous approach.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very. And you know what? I even didn't finish, and people will tell me, "Oh, sorry, we didn't send it until now."
So with a nice soft way, we need to stop there. I think, is it okay for one more question? There's somebody's been waiting for a while, so if I may, she's been very patient.
I would like to have a question regarding for the fundraisers. What kind of strategy do you have to organize and oversee and coordinate the fundraising activities for different Muslim communities? I heard about donor fatigue and competition or tangible results and tangible cause. And I have seen so many Muslim organizations. As a matter of fact, we went to a dinner, and it was 49 organizations, Muslim organizations in Ottawa. So I don't understand how the community work in isolation, or they compete over the donors, and what kind of do we have a vision? A vision, broad vision for all Muslim communities to work with, or how is that? For example, the
SNMC? Or NCCM, which one?
It is NCCM, National Council of Canadian
NCCM.
Muslim. Yes, I never heard really about this group, and I don't know what they are doing.
I'm going to have to, if I may, that's a long question, so if I can give them a chance.
We have National Council in Canada.
Yes, if I may.
What I'd like to say is, really, I'd like to see for fundraising
my apologies.
An organized general approach. I'd like to know what is your answer on that.
Thank you. I know, I'm sorry I jumped in, but that's a very long question. So just to give them a chance, because I know we're wrapping up, I am going to ask whoever wants to jump in, but it has to be super brief, because I have Fatima breathing down my neck, down here. So she's right there asking me to finish. So if we can make it very brief, and if you don't get your answer fully, maybe you can touch base with them at the end, because they'll still hear.
So in a nutshell, for us, when we first started out CAMD, we said we shouldn't have to compete for those dollars with the mosques. The mosques should just give us a budget line and let us do the work that they can't do. It didn't happen. So then we had to compete, and we've created other ways now. We do the traditional fundraiser, but we also try to do a very lavish, wine and dine without the wine event. okay? To really target professionals who have donor fatigue. We make them feel good, come out, we give them all the tools, and we don't say give. Actually, what I did at the first one we did was I said, there are imams in the room, I could give them the mic or you can just write a check. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabia. Are we good?
One thing that I wanted to mention is there are so many organizations in Ottawa, but all of them have different clients. That's very much important. So all people do not go to the same group to fundraise. There are some people whom you would see all over the place. But example, South Nepean Muslim community has their own clientele. Other organizations do the same. Another point that is also important to be mentioned is in regards really how we cooperate, and you pointed out, we have started working actually 2 years ago on networking Muslim organizations, at least to have their fundraisings delivered to the main body, and then we will know exactly when it would happen. Often it's difficult. Why?
May I, Imam Zijad? I mean, it's same as trying to get CHIO, Heart and Stroke, and all of them together. Yeah. Communities have different causes, different needs, and we're not the same. As we said at the beginning, one of the generalization, it's Muslim communities. So they're different targets, different, and each imam, each organization has their own target. So I think we have to keep that in mind too, not to generalize that it's only one group that we're going to. Same as CHIO has their own clients, they have, we talk about heart and stroke, so we need to keep that in mind. With that being said, thank you very much to the panel. Fatima? Okay. There is, I'm going to have to say, there's a little bit of a bias. Fatima wants me to allow Brother Karim, which I love very much, to have one question. She sits on his board. I'm just saying that.
Full disclosure.
So people don't be upset with me.
Connections definitely help in fundraising,
it's
right?
clear connections.
No, I'm not going to ask a question, I was going to make a comment.
Go ahead.
Could you please announce that those people who have already asked the question don't ask anymore, so that it gives opportunity to others like me. I have been quiet for too long.
No, thank you very much. So the request is, if you've asked the question before, please allow the rest of the people to ask a question, because Brother Kalim didn't get a chance to ask a question. So be nice. If you ask the question, give the others an opportunity.
I was thinking that Brother Kalim would start fundraising.
Oh yes, donation. Thank you very much. I think Fatima wants to just thank the panel, and thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you.
You were amazing, Susan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sister Rabia.
So thank you all for a great panel. Very good insight. I have a question, but I'm not allowed.
You're not allowed.
So thank you, Lula. Thank you, Imam. Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Ihsaan. Thank you.
And now, please help me welcome our second keynote speaker, Karim Harji. Karim, please come to the stage. Karim is the co-founder and partner of Purpose Capital, who joins us to share his experience in aligning investment strategies with social impact objectives. Welcome.
So good afternoon, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. Thank you for sticking it out. I know it's been a long day for some of you. And for some of us who came in from Toronto, we're very pleased that we finally got here. It's certainly worth it. After listening to the keynote before me, that alone was worth the price of admission. So thank you again for inspiring us with your courage. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit about impact investing. And some of you, I know, have heard the term before. It might be unfamiliar to others in the room. But hopefully, regardless of where you are in the spectrum of issues, of where you place yourself in Muslim philanthropy, there might be some pieces of content here that might be useful to you. Obviously, there's a lot of ground that I'm hoping to cover, but I'm here for the next little while because I know usually people have lots of questions. We've seen some of this earlier today around concepts for social enterprise, revenue diversification, how do we tap into the next generation of not only donors but also investors and entrepreneurs. So I'm going to touch on some of those themes today, but again, I'm happy to speak more about it, particularly when we talk about some of the questions. So I'm going to take you back 10 years ago. I just really like this picture, which is why it's here. No, it's a fantastic picture. It's actually in northern Pakistan. And that's where I was about 10 years ago. I got a fellowship around working in microfinance. And microfinance is this whole concept that you can provide relatively poor people with small amounts of money to help support their small businesses, and they will use the proceeds from that business to actually support their families, get better education, get better healthcare, etc. And so it was a really interesting intersection of business and development, or using the tools of business to achieve social outcomes for people. And obviously, like anybody else, when you hear about this stat that 99% of people who are living below the poverty line can take a $100 loan and pay it back on time, it's hard to believe. Well, I set out to go and actually figure out whether that was true. And so it's people like this. He was a shopkeeper in North Pakistan who I happened to spend a bit of time with. Was able to take a $150 loan, I believe, pay back $10 a month, and effectively grow that shop to allow his kids to go to a better school than they were before. And people show you stories like this all the time when you actually go and talk to people. It obviously does resonate and provides, I think, some texture around their story, but also how what we traditionally think about enterprise development and economic development and how that translates into social development and cultural development. For me, that was a really important narrative. But it's interesting also that if we take that and extrapolate it out now to many countries in which there are Muslims, in Pakistan there's a lot of microfinance, and in other Muslim countries, Bangladesh is probably the hotspot or the single largest place where there is microfinance concentration. And there you're seeing lots of people, particularly women, being empowered through access to credit that they wouldn't have otherwise had, to be able to then build and grow small enterprises in ways that actually benefit their families. There are some interesting stats, for example, in microfinance around how if men earn money from their business, they tend to spend it on things that are not so good. If women earn money from their business, a majority of it goes back into education and healthcare. There's a lot of evidence around that. And so in places like Bangladesh and a few others, you're seeing some really good examples. But if we try and zoom out a little bit and talk about this concept of, what is the role of capitalism or of capital? I only have one slide of George Bush, and the kicker is it's not even about him. In what ways can capital serve society? There's a pretty famous economist, this guy called Milton Friedman, and he said that really the only social responsibility of business is to make money, basically. And that's been the driving force or the mantra behind a lot of capitalism as we see it today. And particularly in the last decade, we've seen a lot of the challenges of that singularity around why capitalism should only serve one master, in a sense. We've also seen a lot of this in the last few years in particular. Are we putting people or profits before people? Are we really marginalizing large segments of the population? Are we marginalizing issues that we care about at the expense of simply making more money or a financial first lens? For those of you who follow the mainstream business sections, there's a lot around inequality in the business sections of newspapers. That would be virtually unheard of even a few years ago. The other thing that is also very clear is we can't just simply throw more money at the problems, but more money is always good, right? All of us are working in issues that demand many more resources than we have available at our disposal. And the first best solution is usually, can someone write us a check or can we get some more money? Even with that, this was a slide that came from Bill Gates several years ago where he said, or he, I guess, tallied up a lot of the big issues that we're facing as societies and said, well, how much would it cost to fix some of these things? The key message from this slide is really, even with all the money that people are committing, at the international level, but also new initiatives, it's simply not going to be enough to address all of the issues that we're facing. So social finance is really this concept of saying, well, can we look at the tools of capitalism and the tools of the business sector and the private sector and apply those in ways that make society better? Arguably, if we go far enough back and look at why businesses were first started, they weren't started to basically make money. They were started to fulfill real needs that real people had in real communities. So in a sense, we're trying to revisit that concept of what is the role of business, what is the role of capital, and using capital as a means rather than and just as ends in themselves. So I'll talk to you a little bit about some of the range of issues in this area, and then tie it a little bit more directly to Muslim philanthropy as well. This is an interesting example for some of you that are looking for examples in this area. I'm going to talk about a few more, but SolarShare is one that is in Toronto. They basically install solar panels on commercial rooftops, and they've been able to package that in terms of a bond. So you go into, let's say, your average bank, and usually there are GACs and all this type of stuff. Nobody tells you, do you want a SolarShare bond? And I'll explain why in a few minutes. So impact investing, there's a few different components, just so I can give you a bit more clarity around what I'm talking about. The definition is that they're investments intended to create positive impact beyond a financial return. So there's some expectation of a financial return, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well in terms of what we mean by financial return. But it's the provision of capital toward social enterprises. I heard a little bit about this in earlier sessions. There's some expectation of a return within this. But the key point here is around intentionality. There's an intention on both the part of the person providing the capital to not only achieve some type of return, but also have an impact on society. But there's an intention on the recipient of capital to be able to have an impact on society. So this isn't something that we're doing and having unintended consequences of social impact. It's a very deliberate, intentional action. And again, as I connected more closely to why this links to the topic around Muslim philanthropy, I think intentionality is a really important component and why it should matter for Muslims in particular. And then there's also this expectation of, if we are thinking about generating intentional impact, can we measure that type of impact? Again, from the earlier panels, people were talking about the range of things that they're doing and the range of outcomes that they're seeking. Whether you work with people with disabilities to gain better employment, whether you work in healthcare or education, we really want to understand what kind of impact we're having. So in this way, impact investing is almost in between maybe two views of the world. One is that we're looking at more traditional charity and philanthropy, and that's equally important and I think very, very useful for how we construct the environment for social finance. On the other side, we're looking at, I guess, what you might call a bit more enlightened capitalism, where you might say, if there's things like alcohol, tobacco, firearms in your portfolio, well, we don't want to have any of that in our portfolio. You want to screen out everything that's negative. On the other side, you're just looking at the purely positive. Well, is there some type of middle ground? Because the world that we live in today isn't just a dichotomy. There's very few things that are black and white. There's a lot of the gray. And so I'm going to try and explain a little bit more about the gray, this gray that falls in between the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. Because increasingly we're seeing really interesting organizations that fall in between these traditional sectors as we conceive of them and are doing really interesting things in ways that align with the values of the people in the room. Maybe I'll give you one example of a group called Arvind, which is in India. It's a fairly well-known example, but it gives you a bit of a sense of the kinds of scale of issues we're talking about. Now, this is an eye hospital that works in India. They provide cataract surgery, and so it's a big issue in many countries, including developing countries. But basically, if the cataract surgery is not available to people, they go blind. And what Arvind does is they're believed to be the largest provider of eye surgeries in the world. Their average surgeon performs, I think it's about 2,000 surgeries a year. In the US, the average might be about 125. So it tells you the sheer scale at which they're operating. I read a quote that they basically are able to create like the McDonald's of eye surgeries. And again, the doctor's in the room, so maybe you can test me on this. But the fact is that they've been able to provide access to the poorest of the poor for equally valuable and equally quality-wise healthcare that meets or exceeds standards that are available anywhere else. So most of their surgeries are free or low cost. They have a cross-subsidy model in that you basically pay what you can afford, and people that are wealthier that still come to these clinics can pay a lot more, and they enable others to get access to these surgeries. And so you're seeing in this kind of model, you have a bit of a cross-subsidy where people pay by their ability to pay, but also everybody has a choice. They have access. These are the kinds of issues that, again, I think relate to the issues around Muslim philanthropy. We're talking about access, fairness, choice. I think those are fairly consistent with some of the things that relate to social finance. More closer to home, this is a group that I spent a bit of time with, a group called Turnaround Careers. For many of you who work in the social services sector, and particularly with young people, there are a lot of young people that are caught up in the system and can't find a way to make a transition into employment. Often it's not a matter of just getting them a job. They need to develop a set of life skills, they need to develop stable housing. What Turnaround Careers does, it's a business. It runs the way any other business does, but it's a bike career company that hires youth directly from shelters. It often gives them their first job. It allows them to build some stability in their in their work and personal lives, and then allows them to transition into the more mainstream sector, private sector. And we've been able to actually track the impact that they've had. So from a young person who's, let's say, collecting some type of employment insurance or is on the government kind of dime, paying back into the system as a taxpayer, moving from being on subsidized housing to basically renting their own place. We've been able to put some of those numbers together and say people can move from being trapped within this cycle of poverty to actually being contributors into the broader system that we work in. And they've never lost a package. This isn't a business that is charity. It's a business that runs like a business, but has a very explicit intention to make sure that the people employed are successful in every facet of their lives. And for some of you I know who work in nonprofits as well, you're always concerned about this issue around assets. You can't really accumulate assets. And so you're, again, trapped in a bit of the cycle that it's a year-to-year cycle. The Center for Social Innovation, where I have my office, it's a shared space in Toronto. They have a really interesting model where they were able to actually issue what's called a community bond. A community bond enables basically any one of the people in this room to buy effectively a piece of the building. But through that, they were able to finance a building that provides spaces for nonprofits, social enterprises, charities to come together and really find creative solutions around big issues that are facing the world. And they've got 3 buildings in Toronto, and so they've been able to find a model that works. More importantly, they've created a financial instrument that I think any nonprofit or charity should be looking at, called a community bond that allows you to leverage some of your assets. These are hopefully giving you a sense of the types of examples when we talk about social enterprise. It's not just the nonprofit business that is barely making any money and struggles year to year. There are businesses that are able to grow. There are nonprofits that are able to accumulate assets in ways that are smart, but there's also ways that we're finding some really interesting business models to try and serve people who maybe don't have access to services and products today, whether it's around health or education or anything else. So what does this mean for a lot of the topic that we're talking about today? Because you're a diverse audience, I'm going to talk about maybe some principles that I hope can apply to where you're situated. I think the first, as it relates to this conference, is that intentionality matters. Whether it's in life, whether it's in your faith, it should also apply in investing. As I talked about today, social finance is about intentional behavior to generate not only some type of financial return, but also a social impact. And it must align with your values. You know, I'm not an expert on Islamic finance, as an example. You know, there's a whole range of issues around how you bank in that way. But here, when we're talking about returns, we're talking about productive activity. We're talking about activities that are intentionally designed to make specific societies, communities much better. And I think if we can be visible and more transparent around those beliefs, not just in how we give, but in everything we do, how we shop, how we invest, you know, how we interact. As was talked about earlier, we're all human beings. You know, how we engage with other people. I think that's what really matters around intentionality. And one of the challenges I think we often have is a bit of this dichotomy, you know, that we think in terms of trade-offs, in that, yes, maybe I'm obligated to give as a good Muslim, and I'll do that, and that's great. Maybe I'll give some money, I'll give some time, etc. What about the rest of the things that I have at my disposal? What about the rest of the assets that I'm working with? So, you know, as we know, Islam is literally, it is a way of life. And so for us to just simply ignore this part of how we think about our money and only focus on how we think about maybe our time and some of our money, I think, you know, we just need to question that. I think the other thing around trade-offs is when we think about investments, for example, you know, your average advisor might tell you something like, well, there's only risk and return. Those are the only two things that really matter. Well, I think there's a third dimension, which is impact. You know, we've been able to work with a few groups and actually develop scenarios for them to say, well, what are you trading off against? You know, it's not just risk or return. You know, if you prioritize the impact you want to have on society, well, let's try and build that into how you think about the world. And this is particularly important, I think, I know there's a few people from foundations in the room, you know, moving beyond this notion of obligation. And I'll use the foundation kind of as an example of how to illustrate that. This is a chart from the Philanthropic Foundations of Canada, which talks about the assets we have available across the board. The biggest number there is the 45 billion. We usually talk mostly about the 4.5 billion, which is given out in grants. So many of your organizations are competing, in a sense, for a really small pot of money. You know, and what I think I'm trying to say is that the pot should be much bigger than that, in that we're looking at the full range of assets that every organization has and trying to think about how to leverage those. You know, for the average foundation, obviously not the Ottawa Community Foundation, because they're doing some good things here, but the average foundation doesn't really align how it invests with how it grants. And that's very strange, but many of us do the same thing, right? We make our annual donation. We don't really question whether all the other things we're doing are in line with that. And so I think hopefully this will open up a few questions. But the other thing to keep in mind is that when we think about the types of capital that are available for social enterprises, for example, there's a whole range. One of the other things that we have to deal with in this space is that there's this perception that if you want to work, you know, if you want to do social finance, you're going to be sacrificing something. And we're seeing that that's just not necessarily true. You can make investments in the same way that you do today with a social screen or social lens and not have to sacrifice anything. So that's one of the challenges we have in our space. I think the other big challenge is that people are concerned around whether this is a zero-sum game. You know, now that we're talking about investments and that gets people excited, is this going to take away from philanthropy? And the answer is absolutely not. Philanthropy is and will continue to be a very important way to address social issues in communities. Even if we talk about creative business models and things like that, some of those are just not monetized. You know, there are specific issues that can benefit from this approach, and there's others that don't. But there was a next-gen panel, which I caught the tail end of. We're seeing, particularly in other countries, this way of thinking about different business models, this way of thinking about different ways to leverage and experience how you work across different sectors is providing pathways for intergenerational activity and intergenerational engagement. If we look at family offices, for example, in the US, we're seeing a lot of interest around how they engage the third and fourth generations in this space. And for those of you who work, you know, with donors and with their families, this will be, I think, you'll see much more of this than maybe you've seen before. And finally, maybe if I could provide some advice in that, I've had to go through a lot of content fairly quickly, but this isn't a field that has it all figured out. I was talking earlier to Christian from AFP Toronto. We were a bit surprised that we haven't come across each other, or that our worlds, you guys in the room and some of the folks that I work with, we need to be talking much more closely with each other around some of the same, because we're talking about the same issues. And really, how do we use the range of assets that we have available in our communities to address those issues? And so I guess my advice, and maybe it's a bit of a challenge, is that you can not only learn about this space, but I think I would expect all of you to contribute back to this space. Because it's an evolving area, there are a lot of opportunities to both learn about it, but also opportunities to influence where it goes in the next few years. And I'll leave you with this, in that this was some research that we did a few months ago around impact investing in Canada. And there's a lot in this report, so you can download it at purposecap.com. But if you're interested in this area, you'll be able to find a lot more about the current state of activity across Canada, where the capital is, what are some of the most interesting business models, and how groups are coming together in creative ways. And so I'm happy to answer any questions on this, but hopefully I've been able to demonstrate some of the intersections between investing and philanthropy, and how I think working in the middle can really benefit the social issues that we all care about. Thank you.
Okay, so really quickly, we have about 5 minutes for questions. So if I can just ask those who have already asked questions not to come up, and those who are going to come up to just keep the question concise and brief, as well as the answer. Thank you.
Really briefly, microfinance works so well in so many parts of the world. $100 in Canada buys somebody a bag of groceries. Are there ways to use microfinance here that you've come across that are effective?
Yeah, so virtually every, I think, large city in Canada has a microfinance loan fund. The numbers are a bit higher, so we're looking at between $1,000 to $5,000 typically. But again, what is the problem that we're trying to address? In some cases it is access to credit. So if you're new to Canada and don't have a track record, well, you might need a couple $1,000s. But in some cases you might need to use the capital to supplement other things that you're already doing, to grow your business, etc. And so we're seeing successful microfinance happen in Canada. It's still not anywhere close to the level of scale that it is elsewhere in other countries. But again, I think in the whole vein of starting small, there's still much more demand for microfinance, at least in my opinion, that we've seen supply. And so that's an opportunity for, it's happening on an individual level. There are a lot of, in the Muslim community and other communities, people providing loans as well as grants. But I think we need to see much more of that in a much more organized way, perhaps.